Palpatine's consistent use of low-volume speech throughout the prequel era functions as a measurable power strategy rather than a personality trait. His vocal restraint appears in nearly every recorded interaction. Whether addressing the Senate, speaking privately with Jedi Council members, or conversing with Anakin Skywalker, he maintains a controlled, quiet delivery. This pattern demonstrates a deliberate communication style designed to project stability, predictability, and emotional neutrality. Analysis of his speech reveals minimal amplitude variation. Palpatine rarely modulates pitch beyond a narrow range, and he avoids abrupt inflections. This consistent vocal behavior reinforces perceptions of calm authority. Individuals in positions of institutional or political power often use subdued tones to signal that they do not perceive threats or urgency. Palpatine's tone fits this model precisely. In scenes of political debate, he never competes for attention through volume. Instead, his quietness compels others to focus, enhancing the gravitational pull of his presence. Palpatine's controlled speech also reduces the likelihood of detection by the Jedi. The Jedi rely heavily on emotional perception and behavioral analysis. A speaker who displays minimal emotional fluctuation produces fewer cues that could reveal hidden motives. Palpatine's monotone and soft delivery eliminate behavioral leakage that might otherwise indicate duplicity. His quietness, therefore, is not only strategic for public persuasion, but also functional as a concealment mechanism. When interacting with Anakin, Palpatine's vocal restraint serves a specific manipulative purpose. He presents himself as calm, supportive, and measured, reinforcing Anakin's perception of him as a trustworthy figure. Through soft tone, he contrasts the Jedi Council's more formal or detached communication style. This contrast positions him as a more approachable authority figure. The reliability of his voice becomes a psychological anchor for Anakin, allowing Palpatine to guide his decision-making over time. In political environments, Palpatine's low voice creates an asymmetry in attention dynamics. He never competes with louder speakers. Instead, his softness demands silence from others. Senators and aides must pause to hear him, creating a structural advantage in group interactions. His voice becomes a tool of procedural control. The requirement that others adjust their behavior to accommodate his quietness reinforces his dominance without overt command. Palpatine's calmness also shapes the Senate's perception of crisis. In scenes where war escalates, his tone remains steady. This steadiness suggests confidence in the government's ability to manage conflict. As a result, he cultivates an image of reassurance. Individuals are more likely to support policy decisions presented by leaders who appear composed under pressure. His vocal restraint therefore aids his accumulation of emergency powers. In discussions with the Jedi Council, Palpatine's vocal neutrality masks the antagonistic subtext of his statements. His criticisms of the Jedi are delivered with politeness rather than confrontation. This strategy makes his interference appear reasonable, enabling him to reshape institutional boundaries with minimal resistance. His soft tone makes his encroachment harder to challenge because it does not produce overt signs of aggression. Palpatine's soft speech contrasts sharply with the more animated communication styles of other political figures. Characters such as Mace Windu, Yoda, and Padme Amidala display noticeable shifts in tone when addressing conflict. Palpatine's lack of variation creates a behavioral baseline that appears more stable. This stability enhances his influence because it positions him as a consistent point of reference within fluctuating political circumstances. The Chancellor's calmness also diminishes his perceived threat level. Individuals who avoid raising their voices are often interpreted as non-aggressive and rational. Palpatine exploits this bias. By maintaining composure, he reduces suspicion even when implementing controversial policies. His tone allows him to insert aggressive agendas beneath the veneer of procedural legitimacy. Throughout the Clone Wars, Palpatine's restrained tone remains intact during briefings, Senate addresses, and strategic discussions. Even when acknowledging rising casualties or political instability, he never displays alarm. This lack of vocal distress reinforces the illusion that events remain under his control. His tone is therefore both a psychological tool and a narrative indicator of the depth of his manipulation. The consistency with which Palpatine avoids vocal escalation suggests a deliberate avoidance of emotional transparency. Individuals who raise their voices reveal their affective states. By avoiding such displays, Palpatine prevents others from assessing his internal intentions. His speech becomes an instrument of opacity. This opacity is central to his ability to operate simultaneously as Supreme Chancellor and hidden Sith Lord. The only exceptions to his quiet tone prior to the Windu duel occur when he assumes the Darth Sidious persona among subordinates such as Dooku or Grievous. Even then, he rarely raises his volume significantly. His directives remain controlled and deliberate. The lack of major vocal escalation further reinforces that his default communicative approach favours restraint. Palpatine's subdued voice also influences cinematic framing. Directors frequently pair his quiet lines with close shots, emphasising his calm facial expression and still posture. The audiovisual combination constructs a unified behavioural profile: minimal motion, minimal tone variation, and minimal visible emotion. This profile positions him as an immovable presence inside the political system. His calmness stands in contrast with the rising tension of the narrative. As the Republic collapses, various characters express stress through heightened speech or animated gestures. Palpatine's refusal to mirror this escalation highlights his alternative agenda. While others react to the war, he controls it. The divergence between his calm behaviour and the galaxy's chaos becomes a structural marker of his influence. The significance of his quietness becomes most visible when considering its interruption in the Windu duel. Because Palpatine maintains vocal restraint for the entirety of the saga, up to that point, his sudden escalation carries diagnostic importance. The shift signals a transition from orchestrator to participant. His voice reveals the first documented instance of situational loss of control, marking the duel as the only moment in which his behavioural stability fractures. In summary, Palpatine's soft speech is not an incidental characteristic, but a deliberate, consistent strategy that supports his political, psychological, and manipulative aims. His refusal to raise his voice establishes authority through quiet dominance, conceals emotional states, reduces suspicion, and shapes the responses of those around him. This pattern remains unbroken until the confrontation with Mace Windu, making the later deviation a critical behavioural event. Palpatine's elevated vocal intensity during the confrontation with Mace Windu represents an observable break in a long-standing behavioural pattern characterised by restraint, predictability, and strategic modulation. Prior to this moment, his speech consistently remained within a narrow amplitude range. This vocal consistency supported his persona as a stable political authority, allowing him to project emotional neutrality. The sudden rupture of that pattern under Windu's pressure becomes a measurable indicator of acute stress rather than a deliberate tactic. Across the prequel era, Palpatine's vocal strategy functioned as part of a broader social engineering method. By maintaining a soft and controlled voice, he created asymmetric interactions in which he dictated the emotional baseline. Individuals matched his calmness, lowering their guard and reducing suspicion. When Windu cornered him, this structure inverted. Palpatine was no longer setting the pace. The shift in vocal intensity therefore marks a reversal of psychological dominance. The moment Windu deflects the lightning provides the clearest data point. Palpatine's vocal frequency increases, his enunciation becomes irregular, and his intensity rises far beyond previously documented levels. These changes align with stress response patterns associated with threat perception. The consistency of his soft tone throughout decades of political and covert activity makes this deviation particularly notable, suggesting that his outburst reflects loss of predictability rather than intentional exaggeration. The content of Palpatine's speech during the duel reinforces the interpretation. Statements such as, "You will die," and "I am the Senate," are delivered with heightened force, indicating a shift from persuasive rhetoric to reactive assertion. His earlier political language relied on implication, and indirect maneuvering. The duel forces directness, a mode he rarely uses because it eliminates ambiguity and exposes intention. The raised voice thus functions as evidence of constrained options. Palpatine's scream when overpowered by Windu's blade demonstrates physiological strain. The intensity and pitch indicate discomfort and fear, contradicting the assumption that the outburst could be fully staged. Actors attempting to manipulate vocal perception typically maintain controlled breathing and steadiness even when simulating panic. Palpatine's vocal breaks lack these regulating features, pointing toward an involuntary stress response. Once Anakin intervenes, Palpatine immediately reverts to controlled vocal modulation. This rapid shift indicates that his composure is context-dependent rather than structurally fragile. The return to a lower amplitude and slower cadence shows that his earlier screaming was situational, not habitual. The ability to reinstate vocal stability suggests that Palpatine uses his baseline tone as a strategic tool and only deviates when his dominance is genuinely threatened. Palpatine's lowered tone after Windu's fall incorporates sympathy markers and vulnerability cues. These changes are consistent with manipulative communication patterns in which individuals shift from expressions of distress to soliciting alignment from bystanders. The shift back to softened tone is immediate and deliberate, demonstrating conscious control over prosodic elements. This supports the conclusion that the raised voice was not theatrical, but reactive. The duality in his vocal behavior provides insight into his governance methods. Palpatine relies on predictability and quiet authority to maintain influence. Leaders who maintain low vocal intensity often project greater competence and stability, increasing the likelihood of compliance among listeners. His refusal to raise his voice reinforces the perception of control, making the moment he breaks from this pattern a precise marker of vulnerability. The contrast between Palpatine's whispering persona and his screaming during the duel reveals the structural foundation of his power. His dominance is rhetorical before it is physical. His influence depends on the perception of inevitability rather than force. When Windu disrupts that perception, Palpatine's primary mechanism of influence collapses. His raised voice therefore signifies a collapse in the communicative framework that secures his authority. Palpatine's momentary loss of control aligns with psychological models of authoritarian behavior. Authoritarian leaders rely on consistent and controlled self-presentation to maintain legitimacy. When confronted with challenges that exceed their expectations, they shift toward aggressive vocal displays. These displays are not markers of strength, but markers of eroded dominance. Palpatine's reaction during the duel follows this pattern precisely. This interpretation is further supported by observing that Palpatine never exhibits raised volume in interactions, where he retains situational superiority. Even during the confrontation with Yoda, his vocal amplitude remains moderated. The fact that only Windu's intervention triggers elevated volume supports the conclusion that Palpatine perceived this moment as uniquely threatening, both strategically and personally. The suddenness of the vocal escalation also indicates cognitive overload. Individuals under extreme stress often revert to primal vocalizations that lack rhetorical structure. Palpatine's sharp, high-pitched screams during the lightning rebound differ substantially from his typical speech patterns. This suggests a disruption of calculated communication strategies and a temporary dominance of instinctive responses over planned manipulation. Once Anakin commits to his side, Palpatine's vocal behavior resumes its pre-crisis characteristics. His tone becomes measured, his articulation deliberate, and his volume minimal. This rapid restoration of communicative control illustrates that vocal outbursts are situational, aberrations triggered by threat, not fundamental features of his personality. It confirms that Palpatine associates vocal restraint with authority and reasserts it immediately once dominance is re-established. The broader implication is that Palpatine's voice functions as a real-time indicator of his psychological state. When he whispers, he possesses control. When he raises his voice, he perceives loss. His outburst during the duel therefore provides rare empirical evidence of genuine fear. It stands as the only moment in the narrative where his vocal behavior cannot be reconciled with strategic manipulation. This examination clarifies why the Windu duel is narratively and thematically significant. It disrupts Palpatine's carefully constructed framework of soft-spoken power, revealing the fragility beneath the facade. His voice, normally a symbol of dominance, becomes the clearest marker of instability. The raised volume signals the collapse of his composure and the temporary dismantling of the psychological mechanisms through which he controls others. In conclusion, Palpatine's scream during the Windu duel represents a measurable psychological fracture. His vocal intensity exposes the limits of his control and demonstrates that his authority rests not only on strategic foresight, but on the maintenance of a calm, steady, communicative identity. The break in this identity reveals the moment he loses dominance and the moment he becomes vulnerable. His voice thus becomes the most accurate instrument for tracking his power, steady when he rules, unstable when he falters.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.